At a production plant in Taebaek, Gangwon Province, a young, dumb, disgusting, lonely gremlin named Gavin Kang was working while handling packages. During his shift, one of the Baddie managers called him over. As soon as he approached, she began scolding him, explaining that she had just received a call informing her that the packages meant to be sent to Jongno had mistakenly been shipped to Busan instead. She demanded an explanation for the error. Gavin immediately apologized while listening to her complaints like a good boy. As she continued shouting at him, his thoughts drifted elsewhere. He thought about how he was just an ordinary man named Gavin Kang, nothing more than a factory worker living in the countryside. Although he hated living such a life, he knew he had little choice. The factory was located far away from any major city, in a place filled with memories he would rather forget, and jobs like this were the only ones available to him. Despite his dissatisfaction with work, he felt that the rest of his life was not entirely terrible. A few days earlier, however, something very strange had started happening to him. He had begun seeing numbers floating above people's chests. The only thing he had managed to figure out was that the numbers usually ranged from 3 to 30. Beyond that, he had no idea what they meant. The manager's voice suddenly interrupted his thoughts as she demanded to know whether he had been listening to her. After finishing her lecture, she ordered him to return to work. Gavin quickly agreed and went back to his duties. As he resumed working, he continued thinking about the mysterious numbers. Considering how much the manager seemed to dislike him, he found it strange that the number on her chest was only 3. Most people around him displayed numbers ranging from 10 to 30. No matter how much he thought about it, he could not figure out their meaning. At first, he suspected that they represented some kind of interest level, but since he could not make any practical use of that information, the phenomenon only frustrated him even more. After completing his shift, Gavin returned to his apartment. Feeling exhausted, he thought about how troublesome his new ability had become. Being able to see mysterious numbers on people's chests was completely useless and only made him worry even more. He wondered whether he would ever be able to live a normal life again. As he was about to enter his apartment building, he noticed his beautiful neighbor standing nearby. She greeted him casually. The sight of her immediately made him nervous, and before he could gather the courage to say anything meaningful, the opportunity had already passed. As he watched her leave, he remembered the number he had seen on her chest. Unlike everyone else, her number had been 89. It was the highest number he had ever seen. The discovery only deepened his confusion. If his theory about the numbers representing interest levels was correct, then the result made absolutely no sense. There was no way a woman as attractive as her could possibly be interested in someone like him. Gavin could not remember any woman ever showing romantic interest in him. The only woman who had consistently cared about him throughout his life was his mother. Yet if the number truly represented interest, and if her feelings were somehow directed toward him, then perhaps she might ask him out someday. The thought of going on a date with someone like her felt incredible. A moment later, he realized that he had been daydreaming. Even in his own fantasies, he knew such a thing could never happen. More than anything, he wanted to understand the real reason those mysterious numbers kept appearing on people. The next day, Gavin decided to visit the local cinema. He often watched movies because the numbers never appeared on people on the screen, which gave him some peace of mind. The theater itself was located in the middle of nowhere, and he often wondered how it managed to stay in business. Still, he liked the fact that very few people ever came there. The quiet atmosphere helped him focus on the movie. While watching the film, he suddenly noticed a couple sitting in a distant corner of the theater. They seemed completely focused on each other and were engaging in a fitness conditioning session. Gavin was surprised because it had been a long time since he had encountered anyone else inside the theater. What caught his attention even more were the numbers displayed on the couple's chests. Unlike usual, the numbers appeared to be increasing. Watching them closely made him wonder if the numbers truly represented desire rather than simple interest. The possibility shocked him. That night, after returning to his apartment building, he continued thinking about what he had seen. If the 89 on his neighbor's chest represented interest, then it did not make sense. The numbers he had observed on the couple in the theater had not even reached that level, despite their obvious attraction to each other. His neighbor, on the other hand, had looked perfectly calm and normal. The situation simply did not add up. As he entered the elevator, he found the same neighbor standing inside. She appeared nervous and somewhat confused. Gavin hoped he was not imagining things. Deciding that there was no harm in being polite, he greeted her. Before she could properly respond, however, she quickly stepped out of the elevator. Watching her leave, Gavin immediately assumed that she probably thought he was some kind of strange or creepy man. After arriving home, he reflected further on his theory. Perhaps the numbers represented levels of interest or desire after all. If his assumptions were correct, and the scale ranged from 1 to 100, then even a score above 50 seemed extremely high. Thinking about the couple in the theater, he felt that their numbers should have been enough to drive them toward intense physical desire, yet his neighbor's number had been far higher than theirs. The idea seemed impossible, At the same time, he admitted that it was perfectly predictable and pathetic for him to assume that a woman like her would never be interested in a loser like himself. He wondered whether he should try asking her out. If he had never known about the numbers, he probably would not have even considered approaching her. Now, however, the mystery constantly occupied his thoughts. Even the idea of speaking to her frightened him, but he convinced himself that he might try the following day. Deep down, he doubted that he would actually be able to do it. Still, he felt that this might be the only chance he would ever get. Meanwhile, on the other side of the building, the neighbor had just finished taking a shower and was doing wrist curl exercises in her apartment when her door camera alerted her to someone outside. Looking at the monitor, she saw Gavin standing in front of her door. Outside, Gavin was struggling with his nerves. Right up until the moment he had reached her apartment, he had managed to stay calm. All he needed to do was press the doorbell. It was a simple action that anyone could accomplish without difficulty. However, as soon as he stood there, panic began overwhelming him once again. He reasoned that such a reaction was probably normal for a 25-year-old man who had never been in a relationship. The truth was that he did not even know what he planned to say. He considered asking her about the fitness training session he had seen earlier, but immediately realized how strange that would sound. In fact, he doubted she would even open the door after seeing someone like him standing outside through the intercom. If he was lucky, she would simply ignore him. If he was unlucky, she might even call the police and report that a suspicious stranger was lingering outside her apartment. As these thoughts raced through his mind, Gavin realized how ridiculous he was being. Then, without warning, the door suddenly opened. Standing before him was his neighbor. The moment he looked at her, his eyes instinctively moved to the number floating above her chest. The number now displayed a perfect 100. The sight left him completely stunned. The neighbor looked at Gavin and immediately noticed the confused expression on his face. Seeing that he was simply standing there without saying anything, she told him that if he had nothing to say, she was going to go back inside her apartment. Her words instantly made Gavin panic. Before she could turn around and close the door, he quickly stopped her and began apologizing awkwardly. As the words left his mouth, he could feel an overwhelming pressure building inside his chest. His heart was beating uncontrollably, and he felt as though every second was becoming more difficult than the last. Deep down, he thought that he was already terrified just trying to speak to her, let alone gathering the courage to ask her out. While standing there, he looked at her more carefully and realized that she seemed as though she had been busy exercising before he arrived. Trying desperately to think of something that would not sound strange, he searched for the right words but could not find any. In his nervousness, he suddenly blurted out that he wanted to have a bowl of tea with her. The unexpected request completely surprised her. For a brief moment, she simply stared at him as though she was trying to understand whether he was serious. Then she suddenly burst into laughter. Watching her laugh made Gavin even more embarrassed than before. He immediately started apologizing again and felt as though he had completely ruined any chance of having a normal conversation with her. Feeling ashamed of himself, he prepared to leave and thought that he had probably made himself look ridiculous. However, just as he was about to walk away, she stopped him. To his complete surprise, she casually agreed and told him that they could have tea inside her apartment. Gavin could hardly believe what he had just heard. For a moment, he wondered whether he had misunderstood her. When he realized that she was serious, he nervously followed her inside. The moment he entered her home, countless thoughts began racing through his mind. He realized that it was the first time in his entire life that he had ever entered a woman's apartment. His heart was beating so loudly that he felt as though she would be able to hear it from across the room. Everything around him felt unfamiliar. The apartment smelled pleasant and clean, and he immediately assumed that the scent came from the perfume she used. As he sat there quietly, he could not stop observing his surroundings. Meanwhile, she went into the kitchen and began preparing tea. While waiting for her to return, Gavin tried to calm himself down, but his nervousness only continued growing. Every passing second made him more aware of the fact that he was alone inside a woman's apartment for the first time in his life. After preparing the tea, she returned and placed it in front of him. She then asked him why he had suddenly wanted to drink tea with her. The question immediately made him nervous again. As he looked at her, his attention was drawn toward the mysterious number that had been bothering him ever since he first noticed it. He found himself thinking that her desire level had remained unusually high since the previous day. If his theory about the numbers was actually correct, then she must have been putting an incredible amount of effort into remaining calm. The possibility only made him more confused than before. As these thoughts occupied his mind, she continued waiting for an answer. When he remained silent for too long, she asked him again, clearly expecting him to explain the real reason he had come to her apartment. Eventually, their conversation continued, and before he realized it, she unexpectedly suggested that they spend time together doing a high-intensity cardio training session. Although Gavin was initially hesitant and unsure how to respond, he eventually agreed. The following morning, Gavin arrived at work feeling completely exhausted. The moment he started working at the production plant, it became obvious that something was wrong with him. His movements were slower than usual, his concentration was poor, and he constantly looked distracted. One of his co-workers observed him for a while before finally deciding to confront him. She pointed out that he looked extremely strange while working, and told him that at his current pace, he would never finish his assigned tasks. She sarcastically asked whether he was planning to spend the entire night at the factory, because he certainly was not working fast enough to leave on time. Gavin immediately apologized and admitted that he was feeling tired that day. However, instead of showing sympathy, his co-worker began scolding him even more. She complained that he was constantly interfering with other people's work, and warned him that his slow pace was going to put the entire staff behind schedule. She reminded him that the factory was already short-staffed, and that everyone had to properly handle their responsibilities if they wanted to complete the workload. Gavin quietly listened to everything she said and simply agreed. His co-worker then demanded to know whether he was actually going to work or continue standing around. She warned him that if he failed to finish his tasks, he would not even get a lunch break that day. Once again, Gavin quietly agreed and returned to his duties. As he resumed working, he could not stop thinking about how strange everything felt. He wondered whether his exhaustion was affecting his judgment and making him see things differently. After all, he had spent practically the entire night engaged in an intense cardiovascular training session, leaving him completely drained. Every part of his body ached from fatigue. His muscles felt sore, his energy was gone, and even simple movements felt difficult. Suddenly, memories from the previous night began replaying inside his mind. He remembered being inside his neighbor's apartment, remembered their conversation, and remembered every small detail that had happened. The more he thought about her, the more distracted he became. Before long, he found himself completely lost in fantasies involving the neighbor. His thoughts continued wandering until he finally forced himself to focus on his work again. After eventually finishing his shift, Gavin returned home feeling even more exhausted than before. When he entered the apartment building, he discovered that fate seemed determined to place them together once again. The neighbor was already standing inside the elevator. The moment he saw her, his heart immediately reacted. As the elevator doors closed, he prepared himself to greet her. He thought that at the very least he should say hello. However, before he could even open his mouth, he noticed something that completely caught him off guard. Instead of acknowledging him warmly, she appeared to be deliberately avoiding him. She was giving him the cold shoulder. The unexpected reaction instantly shocked him because it was the last thing he had expected after everything that had happened between them the previous night. He stood there in confusion, unable to understand why her attitude had suddenly changed. The situation left him completely surprised and uncertain about what he was supposed to do next. Gavin stood there in confusion as he watched his neighbor walk past him as though he did not exist. As the elevator doors closed and she continued ignoring him, countless thoughts began racing through his mind. He thought that his pathetic brain had spent 25 years constantly expecting the worst possible outcome in every situation. Now, after everything that had happened recently, it seemed determined to convince him that every hopeful thought he had ever entertained was nothing more than a foolish fantasy. He tried to convince himself that there was no point dwelling on it any longer. After all, he had gathered his courage the previous day and taken a chance, and something good had actually come from it. Remembering that, he decided not to give up immediately. He stepped closer to her and directly asked whether she was really ignoring him. His sudden question clearly surprised her, but despite her reaction, she once again chose not to answer. Instead, she continued acting as though he was not there. Seeing no point in pushing further, Gavin eventually returned to his apartment. Once inside, he threw himself onto his bed and spent the rest of the evening overthinking the entire situation. Every possible explanation crossed his mind. He wondered whether he had said something wrong, whether he had misunderstood her intentions, or whether she regretted everything that had happened between them. The more he thought about it, the more confused he became. By the time he finally fell asleep, his mind was completely exhausted. The next day, Gavin went to work as usual. He arrived at the production plant 10 minutes earlier than normal and immediately started working without speaking to anyone. His co-workers quickly noticed the unusual behavior. One of them observed him for a while before approaching him. Despite the fact that he had arrived early, she began questioning him and complaining about his performance. While Gavin quietly apologized, she continued scolding him. She told him that she did not care what kind of problems he had been dealing with lately, because she had already warned him not to let his personal issues affect his work. As Gavin listened, he could not help feeling frustrated. In his mind, he pointed out that this was the first time he had been late in the entire year and a half that he had worked there. Yet, she did not seem interested in hearing any explanation. The thought irritated him more than he wanted to admit. For a brief moment, he imagined himself finally speaking his mind. He imagined telling her that she constantly interfered in his business and criticized every little thing he did. He imagined saying that nothing she ever said was helpful, and that there was not a single person in the world who could possibly enjoy being around someone like her. In his imagination, his words left her completely stunned. However, those thoughts never actually left his head. Instead of saying any of them aloud, Gavin lowered his head and apologized once again. He promised that it would not happen again and assured her that he had taken her advice seriously. He then asked whether she would be willing to extend his hours because he wanted to work overtime. His request immediately changed her attitude. She told him that he had always done good work and that she would be more than happy to give him additional hours. Gavin simply thanked her and agreed. After the conversation ended, he reflected on what had happened. He realized that he was angry and frustrated, but he also admitted that some of her criticism was justified. In a strange way, she had forced him to look at his situation more realistically. As he continued working, he convinced himself that the best thing he could do was focus entirely on his job. He decided that he would work harder than ever and forget about everything that had happened with his neighbor. The memories, the confusion, and all the emotions attached to them would simply be treated like a dream. He told himself that it was time to wake up and return to reality. 5 days passed. One afternoon, Gavin was outside near the playground in front of his apartment building. As he stood there enjoying the pleasant weather, he thought that it might be nice to go for a walk after taking a shower later. While looking around, he suddenly noticed his neighbor, already sitting nearby. She appeared to be waiting for someone. She was dressed beautifully, and the moment their eyes met, Gavin felt his heart react. Instinctively, he wanted to avoid the situation entirely. He immediately turned around and hurried back to his apartment. Once inside, he sat down to eat dinner while trying to calm himself. He thought about how hard he had worked over the past 5 days to forget about her. Yet the moment he saw her again, all those feelings immediately returned. Seeing her reminded him of everything he had been trying to leave behind. He convinced himself that she was probably waiting for someone else. In his imagination, the person she was waiting for was probably some incredibly confident and attractive man. The thought made Gavin feel even worse. Even so, simply thinking about her still gave him butterflies in his stomach. While he was lost in those thoughts, someone suddenly knocked on his door. Gavin assumed that it was probably the gas company employee coming to perform another routine inspection. Without giving it much thought, he checked the security camera. The moment he looked at the screen, he froze. Standing outside his door was his neighbor. His mind immediately went blank. For a moment, he could not even process what he was seeing. Countless, useless thoughts rushed through his head, but none of them seemed important anymore. Whether it was a miracle or pure coincidence no longer mattered. At that exact moment, the only thing he could clearly feel was overwhelming happiness. The emotion completely took over him. Without hesitating, he rushed toward the door. In his excitement, he did not even realize that he was not properly dressed. The moment he opened the door, he noticed that he was not wearing a shirt. Embarrassed, he immediately told her that he would go and get one. Before he could do that, however, he also noticed that she was dressed very casually herself. She then stepped inside his apartment. After entering, she told him that she wanted to spend time with him, doing another fat-burning cardio training session. Faced with her unexpected request, Gavin eventually agreed. The next morning, Gavin slowly woke up and found Heather standing in the kitchen. Heather informed him that she had prepared some ramen for him and told him that he should eat before doing anything else. Seeing the confusion on his face, she casually added that he could go back to sleep after finishing the meal if he was still tired. She also mentioned that she had already eaten, so he did not need to worry about her. Gavin remained silent for a moment as he stared at the cup of noodles in front of him. Deep down, he could not remember the last time someone had gone out of their way to prepare food for him. It was nothing more than a simple cup of ramen, yet the fact that Heather had prepared it specifically for him made him feel unexpectedly happy. As he sat there eating, he could not stop thinking about how unusual the situation felt. He had spent so much of his life taking care of himself that even a small gesture like this felt significant. While he was lost in those thoughts, Heather told him that she had been thinking about something. She explained that ever since they met, they had spent most of their time focused entirely on their workout sessions and had never really taken the time to talk to each other properly. After saying that, she introduced herself and said that her name was Heather Kim. Gavin responded by introducing himself as Gavin Kang. Although they had finally exchanged names, the atmosphere between them remained somewhat awkward. Gavin could still feel the distance between them despite the conversation. As he continued eating, he found himself thinking that once he finished his food, Heather would probably leave and return home. It was at that moment that he truly realized how awkward things became whenever they were not exercising together. During their workout sessions, they always had something to focus on, but outside of that, neither of them really knew anything about the other person. The realization bothered him because they had already spent so much time together without learning even the most basic details about one another. Those thoughts stayed with him long after the conversation ended. After Heather left, he lay down intending to get some sleep, but his mind refused to settle. One particular thought continued repeating itself over and over. He wondered whether Heather would have behaved differently around him if he had been a cooler, more confident person. The more he thought about it, the stronger his desire to change himself became. He wanted to become someone better, someone who could stand beside her without feeling inadequate. Because of those thoughts, he found himself unable to fall asleep, no matter how hard he tried. Later that same day, at around 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturday, Gavin arrived at the warehouse where he worked. It was supposed to be his day off, but he had been called in because there was an overwhelming amount of work that needed to be completed. The moment he entered the warehouse and looked around, he felt exhausted before he had even started. There were pallets everywhere, and the amount of work waiting for him seemed endless. As he stared at the massive workload, he found himself wondering whether he was really expected to handle all of it by himself. The sight alone was enough to drain his motivation. While he was looking around, one of his coworkers approached him and reassured him that the work was not as bad as it looked. She explained that the packages were not particularly heavy, and that they would probably finish everything fairly quickly. She told him that she would handle the sorting process, and that all he needed to do was separate the items onto the correct pallets. Since they had done this kind of work many times before, she believed they would be finished in no time if they worked efficiently. Gavin agreed with her, but there was something else on his mind. He wanted to ask why they seemed to be the only people working there. However, he immediately remembered how things had gone the last time he asked questions that did not concern him. Remembering that experience, he decided it was probably better to stay quiet and focus on his work. As he continued thinking, he considered asking for additional working hours. Eventually, he called out to Miss Park, intending to bring it up. However, the moment he got her attention, he lost all confidence. Before he could say what he wanted, he quickly claimed that it was nothing and returned to work. In reality, there were many things he wanted to say. He wanted to complain about having to work overtime. He wanted to point out that the pay was nowhere near enough to justify the extra effort. He wanted to express how frustrated he was about being called in on his day off. Yet, none of those words actually came out. When Miss Park asked him whether he had something to say, he simply replied that he did not and said that he was going back to work. Internally, however, he continued grumbling. It was obvious that they would be stuck there for hours. The fact that he was spending his weekend at the warehouse instead of resting irritated him more and more the longer he thought about it. Not long afterward, another coworker named Eugene Cho arrived at the warehouse. The moment he appeared, he complained that he had answered Miss Park's call and was already regretting it. He joked that he should have turned his phone off and pretended not to notice the call. Hearing that, both he and Gavin immediately realized that they had ended up there for exactly the same reason. After their brief conversation, they got back to work. The next several hours passed with the three of them focusing on the workload. Although Gavin had no desire to spend his weekend working, he had to admit that the job itself was progressing smoothly. Since most of the packages were relatively light, the work moved faster than he had expected. While they were working, Gavin became curious and asked Eugene why he had been called in when he normally worked on line 1. Before Eugene had the chance to answer, Miss Park suddenly appeared and asked who had placed a pallet onto the forklift. Eugene immediately admitted that he was responsible. The moment he answered, Miss Park began criticizing him. She pointed out that the pallet had not been wrapped properly and suggested that he had probably loaded it carelessly without paying enough attention. As Gavin listened to the conversation, he found himself anticipating what would happen next. Based on everything he knew about Miss Park, he expected her to continue criticizing Eugene because she disliked people acting without being completely certain of what they were doing. Miss Park proceeded to lecture Eugene about the importance of safety. She reminded him that the first rule of the job was safety, and that the second rule was also safety. She explained that even though wrapping pallets might seem like a simple task, mistakes could create serious problems and potentially cause accidents. Watching Eugene get scolded so harshly, Gavin eventually decided to speak up. He commented that he thought Eugene already understood his mistake. Miss Park immediately turned her attention toward him and replied that if she ignored mistakes like this, people would simply repeat them in the future. Gavin responded by pointing out that they had come to help on their day off. He explained that he did not think she was being particularly fair to them. He also added that Eugene was not even assigned to her line. Miss Park quickly challenged him by asking whether he would personally take responsibility if something went wrong. She reminded him that he was not a manager and pointed out that she certainly did not remember promoting him to such a position. She then told him to focus on his own responsibilities instead of interfering with hers. Before Gavin could respond, Miss Park threw her glove at his face and told him that if he was going to defend mistakes, then he should have ensured they never happened in the first place. The sudden action completely caught him off guard. Startled, he immediately began apologizing. Miss Park warned him that mistakes should never be taken lightly, and that anyone involved needed to be prepared to accept responsibility for them. After delivering her final warning, she walked away. As Gavin watched her leave, he could not help thinking that she had an incredibly short temper. Once she was gone, Eugene turned toward Gavin and told him that he was amazing. He admitted that he could never have spoken to her the way Gavin just had. Gavin responded by explaining that he simply did not think it was right for her to yell at someone who was not even part of her department. Eugene seemed impressed by the explanation and commented that Gavin had actually stood up to the boss's daughter. Hearing those words instantly shocked Gavin. His surprise was so obvious that Eugene laughed and remarked that he was acting as though he had never known. Eugene explained that everyone in the warehouse knew she was the boss's daughter, and that most people would never dare challenge her because of it. He then began sharing additional information about her. According to Eugene, she had graduated from one of the best universities in the country. After that, she earned a master's degree and even studied abroad. Apparently, she had once considered pursuing a PhD before eventually deciding to work at the warehouse instead. Eugene also mentioned that there had been many rumors surrounding her return. Some people claimed that she had experienced problems involving a man while she was overseas and that her father had forced her to come back. Whether the rumors were true or not, Eugene did not know. However, he had heard them repeatedly from different people. He also mentioned that many employees either quit or were fired shortly after working under her supervision. Gavin listened carefully as he processed all of the information. Everything Eugene was saying was completely new to him. Eugene jokingly remarked that if Gavin ended up getting fired because of what happened earlier, he would at least buy him a good meal. Gavin laughed and insisted that there was no way anyone would be fired over something as minor as a pallet wrapping mistake. Nevertheless, his attention gradually shifted toward Miss Park. As he observed her from a distance, he found himself wondering why she was spending her weekend working so hard if she really was the boss's daughter. Most people in her position would not have bothered showing up at all. Maybe she simply ignored the advantages that came with her status. After hearing about her academic achievements, he had to admit that her qualifications were impressive. As for the rumors about her personal life, he had no idea whether they were true. Ever since he started seeing numbers on people's chests, Miss Park had consistently displayed only 3. At the same time, he remembered his decision to become someone worthy of Heather. The possibility that he might actually get fired for standing up to the boss's daughter had never crossed his mind when he first decided to change himself. Looking back, he realized that despite spending a considerable amount of time around Miss Park, there was still a lot about her that he did not know. Meanwhile, the exhaustion from getting almost no sleep the previous night was catching up to him. Before long, Miss Park started shouting at them again. She complained that they would never finish the workload if they continued moving so slowly. She accused them of wasting time and warned them that nobody would be leaving until the job was completed. She reminded them that a truck driver would be arriving later and that all of the shipments needed to be loaded and ready before the end of the day. Gavin silently thought that he had no energy left. At the very least, he wanted something to eat before doing any more work. In fact, he felt so tired that he was convinced he would fall asleep immediately after having a meal. The next several hours were spent working non-stop without any meaningful breaks. Gavin became more exhausted with every passing minute, but there was no alternative except to keep going. Eventually, after hours of continuous work, they finally finished everything. Gavin looked around at the completed pallets and neatly organized parcels and felt relieved that the job was over. However, when he looked for Eugene, he realized that his coworker had somehow disappeared. Since he wanted to go home as well, he began searching for him around the warehouse. While looking around, he noticed someone bent over on the opposite side of the work area. Assuming it was Eugene, he casually walked over and gave the person a friendly slap on the back. The moment the individual turned around, Gavin immediately realized something was wrong. The person was not Eugene at all. It was Miss Park. Already exhausted and visibly irritated from the long day, she looked extremely frustrated. The realization hit Gavin instantly, and his heart nearly stopped. After casually slapping the boss's daughter on the back by mistake, he could only stare at her in complete terror as he realized exactly what he had just done. Miss Park was shouting at Eugene and Gavin, demanding a full explanation for everything that had just happened, her tone sharp and unwavering as she waited for answers. As Gavin stood there listening to her, he could not help but think that he was already deep in trouble, and the situation had only become worse because he had somehow offended her earlier in the day as well. He kept reminding himself that he had not done anything intentionally. Gavin tried to speak and told her that he had slapped her because he had mistaken her for Eugene. He repeated that it had all been a misunderstanding and that he had absolutely no idea it was her at that moment. He insisted that he would never have done something like that on purpose. However, Miss Park looked at him in disbelief and immediately pointed out that they dressed completely differently and even worked in separate buildings, making his explanation sound unreasonable to her. She questioned how he could possibly still call it a misunderstanding under such clear differences. She then asked him directly whether he was completely sure he was not using the situation as an excuse to take revenge for what had happened earlier, rather than admitting it was intentional. Gavin quickly denied her accusation, but at the same time, his mind was filled with uneasy thoughts as he looked at the phone in her hand. He kept thinking that his entire situation now depended on her decision, as if she could either report him to the police or choose to stay silent depending on how he responded. He realized that he could not say any of those thoughts out loud. Miss Park's intense and dangerous expression made him even more nervous, and he felt trapped between fear and confusion. At that moment, Gavin remembered to himself that he had already decided he needed to change as a person. He thought that if he truly wanted to become better, then this was the moment where he had to prove it. As he tried to gather his courage, his body suddenly gave out from exhaustion, and he fainted onto the ground. While unconscious, he dreamed that he was at a party together with Miss Park, and in that dream, she was extremely kind to him, speaking gently and treating him in a warm and friendly way that felt unfamiliar yet comforting. Everything in the dream felt peaceful and almost unreal compared to reality. However, when he eventually woke up, he slowly realized that it had only been a dream. He was in the break room, lying down, and nothing from the dream had actually happened. Even so, he found himself thinking that she had looked very beautiful while smiling in that dream, and that thought stayed with him. As he fully regained awareness, Miss Park noticed that he had woken up and told him to come over. Gavin immediately remembered that the issue between them from earlier still had not been resolved, so he quickly began apologizing again without hesitation. He felt that he needed to fix the situation properly before it got worse. After hearing him speak, Miss Park said that when she saw him stand up to her earlier, it had made her think more deeply about the entire situation. She admitted that over the years they had worked together, he had never seemed like someone who would deliberately lie or intentionally harm anyone. She described him as someone who was usually timid, frustrating, and hesitant about almost everything, but not someone who acted with bad intentions or cruelty. Her tone was still strict, but there was a slight shift in how she viewed him. However, she also warned him very clearly that if something like this ever happened again, whether it was intentional or not, she would make sure he faced serious consequences. She told him firmly that she would not overlook it a second time under any circumstances. After saying this, she suddenly told him to get ready because they were going out to eat. Gavin was completely surprised by this sudden change in direction and could not understand why she would suggest going out after such an intense situation. He even wondered what kind of restaurant would still be open at that time. Despite his confusion, they eventually went together to a restaurant. During the meal, Gavin tried to bring up Eugene, but Miss Park calmly ordered soup and said that she would pay for the food and then send him home afterward. Gavin then asked her whether she had really waited for him until he woke up. He mentioned that he thought he had been unconscious for around 4 hours. Miss Park responded simply that she had work to do anyway, so it was not a problem for her to stay. Hearing this made Gavin think that she had actually waited for him, and this realization gave him a strange sense of reassurance. He began to reflect that speaking honestly and acting on his thoughts seemed to be working better than he had expected. As he thought more about everything that had happened, he even linked the situation back to earlier events in his life, like the mysterious number on Heather's chest, and how one small moment had somehow led to all of this. He realized that if he had not gathered the courage to speak, none of these interactions with Miss Park would have taken place at all. This made him think that his decision to change himself was slowly affecting not only him, but also the way his relationships were forming. Gavin then asked her if she would like to drink with him. Miss Park replied that it was already too late for that. Gavin explained that he and Eugene had originally planned to go out for drinks that day, but he had to cancel because of work, and the day had already been extremely long and exhausting for him. Miss Park simply told him that he had worked hard and that it was fine. As they continued talking, Gavin found himself thinking about how she had smiled in his dream earlier, and how different it had been from the way she usually acted. He wondered whether she could actually smile like that in real life. Unexpectedly, Miss Park told him that he was the last person she expected to invite her out for a drink, and she commented that he had not been acting like himself lately. She asked him directly if something had happened. Gavin replied that they normally did not talk much at work and barely knew anything about each other, and he suggested that maybe it would not hurt for them to get along a little better. While speaking, he stumbled slightly over his words, showing his nervousness. Miss Park responded by reminding him that despite not knowing each other well, they had still worked together for years without any real problems. Gavin then tried to explain himself again, saying that what he meant was that some of the trouble earlier might have happened because they did not understand each other properly. Realizing how unclear he sounded, he quickly apologized and told her that she could talk to him about anything if she ever wanted to. Miss Park then pointed out that he had already fainted earlier due to exhaustion. Gavin admitted that it was true, and said that he had not been sleeping well recently, although he did not go into detail about the reason. She immediately noticed that he was avoiding the explanation and said that he was clearly keeping secrets. Gavin responded that she already knew what kind of person he was, and that he was someone who could not easily express what he was thinking. Miss Park acknowledged that while he always completed his work properly, that was usually enough. However, she also pointed out that she had noticed several issues with him, such as the fact that he only did exactly what he was told and rarely took initiative. She mentioned that the incident earlier could have been avoided completely if he had handled things more carefully, instead of becoming overly stressed about something that was not even his fault. Gavin then mentioned that her father was the boss of the company, and that she had studied overseas and even earned a PhD. He quickly added that he did not mean anything negative by it, but only wanted to say that there were still many things he did not know about her. Miss Park understood his point and replied that now that he had learned more about her, he seemed to have decided that he wanted to get closer to her. She added that she could easily guess why he had suddenly asked her to drink with him. Gavin joked that a failure like him might simply be lucky enough to get a chance to drink with her. Miss Park smiled at that response, and for Gavin, seeing that smile made him realize that it had been a long time since he had seen her expression soften like that. Soon after, she said she was going to the bathroom and told him to finish eating quickly so they could leave. Gavin agreed. While she was away, he thought again about how rare it was to see her laugh or smile, remembering a previous moment at work when she had teased him in a similar way. He realized that even the smile from his dream had not been the first time she had shown a softer side. When she returned, she asked if he had finished eating, and he said yes. She then asked if he was ready to go, and he agreed. As they were about to leave, Gavin noticed that she seemed to enjoy teasing him, even though she still kept an emotional distance. He felt that the only times her interest seemed to rise slightly were during unusual situations like the earlier accident. After leaving the restaurant, she suggested that he take a taxi home. Gavin looked at her and thought carefully about everything that had happened, unsure of what it all meant for them. Even so, once they stepped outside, he gathered his courage again and asked her if she would like to watch a movie with him on Streamflex, which left her visibly surprised. Gavin felt deeply embarrassed about the offer he had just made to Miss Park, and as he stood there facing her reaction, he thought to himself that he could easily read the look she was giving him, and at that moment she seemed both confused and irritated. Miss Park immediately questioned him and asked whether he had been drinking, as his behavior seemed unusual and out of character to her. Gavin, still struggling with his embarrassment and trying to recover from the awkward situation, attempted to shift the conversation by asking her if there was anything she liked the most, as if he could somehow fix what had just happened or at least understand her better. However, Miss Park did not respond positively to his attempt and instead questioned him back, asking if there was something he was trying to start between them. She told him directly that there was clearly something wrong with him that day and that his behavior did not make sense. She then firmly stated that she did not want to hear anything else from him at that moment and immediately began walking toward her ride, effectively ending the conversation without leaving any room for further discussion. Gavin stood there, watching her leave, and felt even more confused and unsettled, thinking that his only intention had been to help her find something she liked or to connect with her in some way. But instead, she had completely shut him down and stopped acknowledging him. He noticed that she had suddenly turned away with a cold, lifeless expression on her face, which made him feel uneasy and unsure about what he had done wrong. At the same time, he began reflecting on what he considered his unusual ability to sense other people's interest levels, and in her case, he felt that whatever understanding he had about her was unstable and unclear, especially after the way she reacted to his words. While he was still lost in overthinking, he was suddenly startled when he saw her phone ringing, and in his nervous state he first tried to respond but accidentally rejected the call. The phone rang again immediately afterward, and this time he quickly picked it up. On the call, Miss Park questioned him about why he had asked her all those strange questions earlier, and after saying a few words in response, she abruptly ended the call without giving him a chance to explain further. Gavin stood there afterward thinking that she had neither yelled at him nor scolded him harshly, but had only mentioned the word cake before hanging up, and he interpreted it as a sign that she might have been slightly offended when he said she liked nothing. Despite everything, he felt a strange sense of relief that the situation had not escalated further and that he had not been fired from his job. On the other hand, Miss Park, while sitting in her ride, began replaying and analyzing everything he had said earlier, including his mention of movies and the invitation for a drink, and she started questioning whether his behavior had been inappropriate or possibly even uncomfortable from her perspective. She even considered the possibility that he might have been acting too forward or unintentionally crossing boundaries, which made her think seriously about his intentions. Meanwhile, Gavin had reached outside his department and stood there reflecting on how extremely intense and overwhelming the entire day had been, thinking that he could not believe how his day had turned out from something completely ordinary. He recalled how it had started with a simple morning, eating ramen, and somehow led him into a series of chaotic and emotionally confusing events involving warehouses, accidents, and complicated interactions with Miss Park. As he thought about everything, he realized that he had learned quite a lot about her that day, including the fact that she was the boss's daughter and that she liked cake, and this realization added to his sense of exhaustion. He felt mentally drained and thought that he just wanted to go home and rest, hoping for some kind of comfort after such a long and stressful day. As he was lost in these thoughts, the doorbell suddenly rang, and when he opened the door, he saw Heather standing there, telling him that she had been waiting for him. Without saying much more, both of them then entered her apartment, and after going inside, they began a fitness conditioning session together. Miss Park, on the other side, was thinking about Gavin's words and reflecting that normally she would not have allowed something so light to occupy her thoughts in such a way, and what had crossed her mind in that moment was to send him home, because he must have been tired, so she ultimately decided to let him go without saying anything more. After completing endurance training with Heather, Gavin had returned home feeling very happy and relieved, and when he lay down on his bed, he suddenly started receiving a message from Miss Park, asking about the number of boxes that had been sent for shipment. Shortly after that, he received another message from Heather, who was asking him to go on a date with her, and in that moment, he realized that she had actually asked him out. This realization made him feel unexpectedly good and excited, and he began thinking that it was going to be his first date with her. He kept telling himself that it did not matter how inexperienced he felt because he would be with her, and that they should go through it together. At the same time, he started thinking that he needed to figure out everything properly, including what to do on the date and what he should wear, and he felt that he only had about an hour to get ready, which made him feel rushed. Because of this pressure, he started panicking again and overthinking every small detail. 1 hour later, he was standing at the meeting spot, thinking that it was a good thing the mall had decent clothing options so he could quickly buy something suitable, and he also thought that the lady from his hair salon had done a good job fixing his hair, which at least made him feel slightly more confident. At the same time, he kept thinking about Heather and how she might be hungry when she arrived, assuming that they might go for food first. When she finally arrived, she looked so gorgeous that people around them could not help but notice her, and as she came closer, he found himself completely unable to take his eyes off her. She asked him if he wanted to go anywhere specific to eat, and he replied that they could just walk for a while. While internally he was thinking that it had already been difficult enough for him to talk to her because she was so pretty, and now that she looked even more beautiful in front of him, he could not think clearly and felt like he was completely losing confidence and appearing like a loser in front of her. While they were walking, a movie came up in conversation, and she suggested that they should go inside. At that moment, he felt that he had finally managed to get himself on this date after so much hesitation, and he thought he should stick to his plan and tell her about the movie tickets he had already bought. So he told her that he had already purchased tickets. She then suggested that if they wanted to watch a movie, they could just watch one there instead, and he immediately thought that he had left the house today promising himself that it would be a good date and that there would be no unnecessary stress or distraction, so he insisted again that he had already bought the tickets and they should go there. After hearing this, she agreed, and both of them went into the movie theater. Inside the theater, he explained the movie to her in detail, saying that it was based on the director's life and that it was the final movie of a master director, and he added that he had been really looking forward to watching it with someone else instead of alone. He continued explaining everything about it, hoping that she would enjoy it as much as he expected. During the movie, he noticed that she started getting closer to him, and although it made him slightly nervous, he told himself that they should focus on the movie. At the same time, he kept thinking that she was very enthusiastic and energetic when it came to workout sessions, and he felt grateful that she was doing all of that for him and supporting him in that way. After the movie ended, they came out of the theater together, and while she was still with him, he told her to just follow him because the next place was right around the corner. He also asked her if she had enjoyed the movie, and she said that she had. He responded by saying that he would not have expected anything less from the last movie of a master director. After that, she mentioned that she thought they should go to a motel nearby because it was a new building and looked very beautiful, and as she spoke, she sounded a bit unusual about it. He immediately responded by saying no, and telling her that she was going in the wrong direction, while thinking that they should not misunderstand the purpose of this date and that they were almost at their next destination. She then said that if he was hungry they could eat first, and afterward they continued moving toward that direction. After that, he decided to take her to the street food market instead, and he told her that she might have never been there before and that he personally liked it because it was not very busy at that time. She agreed and said that they should check it out, and both of them ended up enjoying the street food together. After that, they went to a restaurant for soup and more food, and later both of them ended up in the park, where she seemed confused about why they were there. At that point, he took out a ring and proposed to her, telling her that he had bought it from the market earlier and that when they got married, he would definitely get her a proper wedding ring. But before that, he thought it would be a good idea to give her a promise ring. However, she told him that he was getting the wrong idea and that just because they were going out did not mean they would get married, since not everyone gets married simply because they date each other. Her words hit him deeply, and it felt like his heart was torn apart because he had not expected her to say something like that. Gavin, after listening to Heather's rejection, remained standing there for a few moments in complete silence, as if his mind had gone blank. He slowly tried to process what she had just said, but the words kept repeating in his head without forming any clear meaning he could hold on to. In his thoughts, he kept telling himself that they had not even properly been on a real date in a defined way, and that they had only spent limited time together so far. Because of this, he could not understand how she could already decide and define their connection so clearly and so quickly. He finally spoke in a low and uncertain tone, saying that they were not even dating in that sense, and that he wanted to understand what their relationship actually was at that present moment, trying to make sense of everything that had just been said. In response, Heather told him directly that they were only good friends. The moment he heard those words, Gavin felt as if something inside him had suddenly stopped. He did not react immediately on the outside, but inside his thoughts became heavy and disordered. It felt familiar to him in a painful way, and his mind quickly drifted into an old memory that he had not expected to resurface at that moment. He remembered his third year of high school when he had confessed his feelings to a classmate, believing it meant something deeper. At that time as well, he had been told the same words that she only liked him as a friend, and shortly after that, she had begun avoiding him completely. That memory came back to him very clearly, and instead of fading, it intensified what he was feeling in the present moment. He stood there thinking that he had done so much for Heather, spent time with her, and invested emotionally in everything they had shared recently, and because of that, it felt impossible for him to accept that it could be reduced to something so simple and casual. His mind kept trying to reject the idea, as if refusing to believe that it could end this way. At the same time, Heather continued speaking, telling him not to overthink the situation. She explained that she had never had a boyfriend before, and that in her experience, all her relationships had only been friendships. She further added that she did not like the feeling of being tied down to one person, and that something like a no-strings-attached arrangement would be a more suitable option for her. Gavin listened, but internally, he felt even more confused and distant. He thought to himself that he had never even properly understood or considered the meaning of friendship in that kind of way, where it could be separated so clearly from romantic expectation. It felt strange and difficult for him to accept that she was standing right in front of him, speaking normally, while still defining him only as a friend, without hesitation. As he continued to process her words, Heather spoke again, saying that she had dressed up specially for today and that they should still go somewhere and relax instead of letting the moment end like this. She added that relationship labels did not matter much to her, and that just looking at him made her feel excited, so they should simply go and enjoy themselves together. However, Gavin, overwhelmed by everything he was feeling at once, slowly reached a breaking point emotionally. He told her that he thought they should end the date there. He said that he had a good time with her, but that he should leave now. His voice carried a sense of finality, even though he was struggling inside. Heather tried to stop him and suggested again that they should go to the motel, insisting they continue spending time together, but he did not respond to her suggestion. Instead, he turned away, unable to continue the conversation any further, and walked away. As he made his way back to his apartment, his emotions became heavier with every step. Tears began to form as he kept replaying her words repeatedly in his mind, especially the part where she had called him only a friend. He felt unable to manage the intensity of everything that had happened in such a short span of time, and he kept thinking that he could not face her again in that moment. His thoughts became increasingly self-critical and confused, and he began questioning his understanding of relationships and himself. He felt as though someone like him could never truly be seen in a romantic way by someone like her, and this thought made him feel even more overwhelmed and mentally exhausted, as if his mind had become too full to process anything clearly anymore. On the other side, Heather was in her apartment, sitting quietly as she replayed the events in her own mind. She could not fully understand why Gavin had expected her to become his girlfriend so quickly, or why he had left in such an abrupt manner. She felt a sense of disappointment because she had taken the time to dress up and had been genuinely expecting to spend a pleasant and enjoyable time together, but instead the situation had ended earlier than she expected. At the same time, she found herself thinking that perhaps Gavin had been considering marriage or something much more serious, and that thought made her see him as somewhat innocent and different from the people she had previously met. She reflected that she had encountered others who had only wanted to move in with her, but never someone who had spoken or behaved with such seriousness so early on. Even so, She felt unsure about how to interpret his behavior and decided not to overthink it too deeply, assuming that he might contact her later. While she was still thinking about this, the doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. She went to check it, only to find that it was a parcel delivery instead of Gavin. This left her feeling slightly disappointed, and after that moment passed, she returned to her usual routine and continued practicing wrist curls, trying to focus on her physical training. The next morning, Gavin woke up feeling uneasy and restless. As he moved around his apartment, he kept thinking nervously about the possibility of running into Heather again, and this thought made him increasingly anxious. While he was lost in these thoughts, he suddenly heard a door opening nearby, and almost immediately, he found himself face to face with Heather. She looked at him and said that she wanted to talk to him, and in that moment, he became extremely nervous and tense, as if he was not prepared for what might come next. Heather told Gavin that they should perform the endurance session together because they were friends and, in her opinion, it should not matter. As she said that, Gavin found himself thinking that he wanted to do it with her as well, but for some reason he felt that he could not bring himself to agree so easily. Looking directly at her, he apologized and explained that he needed some time to think about everything because he genuinely did not know how he should interpret the situation or what conclusion he should reach. As Heather listened to him, she gradually realized that the approach she had been using was not working at all. She then told him that he had completely misunderstood the point she had been trying to make from the beginning. She questioned whether he honestly believed that if she had been waiting for him and then suddenly decided to forget everything and end their relationship, it would simply be over for him. Gavin admitted that she had a point and said that perhaps she should have done exactly that. However, he immediately pointed out that she had not done it. Instead of walking away, she was still standing there and continuing to pursue him. He told her that if she truly wanted to end everything between them, it would break his heart, but there would be nothing he could do about it because he already knew that she was far out of his league. After expressing those thoughts, Gavin explained that he had to go to work. He promised that he would call her after he had enough time to properly think through everything that had happened. With that, he left the area, while Heather remained standing there with a completely confused expression, realizing that there was nothing more she could do at that moment no matter how hard she tried. Later that evening, Gavin returned home after finishing work. As soon as he entered his home, he began thinking about the situation once again. He admitted to himself that he seriously had no idea what he should do. He reflected that if he had found himself in a situation like this in the past, he probably would have simply accepted it and told her that he was fine with everything. However, he quickly realized that this situation was different, and that he could not come up with a solution on his own. Convinced that he needed advice, he decided that he would ask all of his friends for their opinions. He grabbed his phone and began sending messages to every friend he could think of, carefully explaining the situation and asking what they thought he should do. After receiving various responses, he realized that none of them had provided a complete answer. Although they all offered suggestions, none of the advice felt sufficient enough to solve the problem he was facing. As he continued thinking, he remembered that Miss Park was the only woman in his immediate vicinity whom he regularly spoke to. He wondered whether there might be someone else he could ask for a female perspective. However, after giving it some thought, he realized that he actually had no female friends at all besides Miss Park. That realization made him feel even more stuck than before. Since he could not think of anyone else, he considered posting the situation online. Believing that strangers might offer useful advice, he described everything on an online platform and waited for responses. Unfortunately, as he read through the comments, he felt that nobody was taking him seriously. Many of the responses seemed unhelpful, while others failed to address his problem altogether. No matter how many comments he read, he could not find a solution that satisfied him. Frustrated by the entire situation, he continued thinking until one possible idea finally came to mind. Deciding to act on it, he ordered a cake online. The following day, Gavin went to work as usual. After completing all of his tasks, he approached Miss Park and informed her that he was finished. Miss Park responded by telling him to wrap up the remaining things and head home. Instead of leaving immediately, Gavin told her that he had brought something to bribe her with. As soon as he revealed the cake, Miss Park was visibly shocked. She immediately recognized that it was a cake from a famous hotel and expressed her surprise. At the same time, she admitted that she did not understand why he was referring to it as a bribe. Gavin then explained that there was something important he wanted to talk to her about. Hearing the seriousness in his voice, Miss Park told him to continue if the matter was truly important. Gavin proceeded to explain everything that had happened. He carefully told her about the situation involving Heather and everything that had been weighing on his mind. After listening to his explanation, he suggested that they go somewhere else where they could talk more comfortably. Miss Park looked at him with confusion and pointed out that he had brought her a cake and was now asking her to go to a bar. Even though she did not fully understand his reasoning, she eventually agreed and told him to come with her. The two of them then entered a very nice cafe. Upon entering, Gavin immediately noticed how pleasant the atmosphere was. The place was comfortable and welcoming, which made him feel slightly more relaxed. Miss Park ordered several coffees before turning her attention to the cake. She approached the manager and asked whether it would be acceptable for them to eat the cake inside the cafe. The manager politely explained that it would not be possible because the cafe already sold its own desserts. Not wanting to give up, Miss Park explained that the cake was extremely special to her. She emphasized that it was the first time Gavin had ever bought her something and that she truly wanted to enjoy it there. She even offered to pay extra if necessary and continued persuading the manager. Eventually, after listening to her insistence, the manager agreed to make an exception for that one occasion. Satisfied with the outcome, Miss Park returned to the table with Gavin. The two of them sat down together, and Gavin immediately noticed that she seemed to have a particularly serious aura around her. As they settled into their seats, Miss Park began eating the cake. The moment she tasted it, her expression brightened and she enthusiastically commented on how delicious it was. Gavin watched her reaction carefully and remarked that she seemed to enjoy it very much because he had never seen her make such an expression before. After enjoying a few more bites, Miss Park asked whether there was something he wanted to discuss. Gavin replied that there was, and began explaining everything in detail. He told her about everything that had happened between him and Heather and carefully described all of his concerns. After finishing his story, he asked for her honest opinion and advice. Once she had listened to everything, Miss Park told him that, in her view, his neighbor was not uninterested in him at all. She believed that he simply needed to put in more effort and give Heather a reason to fall for him. Gavin immediately rejected the idea and insisted that it was impossible. Miss Park disagreed with him and explained that his biggest problem was his lack of confidence. She told him that he was actually a dependable person with a decent personality. According to her, if he carried himself more confidently, people would begin to notice his good qualities. She even told him that his appearance was not bad and that confidence would make a significant difference in how others perceived him. Hearing those words left Gavin genuinely surprised. He reflected on how he had never realized that Miss Park thought so positively of him. Throughout all the time he had known her, he had never imagined that she viewed him in such a favorable light. As he considered everything she had said, he admitted to himself that he wanted more than friendship with Heather. He wanted a genuine and perfect relationship with her. More importantly, he realized that if he wanted that future, he would need to change himself. Feeling grateful, Gavin sincerely thanked Miss Park and admitted that she was probably right. Miss Park responded by saying that she intended to stay there a little longer and enjoy more cake and coffee, so he could leave whenever he wanted. As Gavin listened to her, he could not help thinking that he had expected her to at least offer him a slice of the cake. After all, he had spent more than $300 on it, and wanted to know what it tasted like as well. However, despite that hope, she continued eating without offering him any. Meanwhile, at her own home, Heather was lost in thought. She found herself reflecting on the fact that Gavin had offered her a ring without even knowing her true personality. She wondered whether he would still feel the same way if he learned about the real version of her. Even with those doubts, she realized that she could not simply give up on him. Gavin had given her a feeling she had never experienced before. The sense of happiness and gratification he had brought into her life was unlike anything she had previously felt. She remembered his sincerity and the way he had expressed that he would rather end the relationship than settle for something that was not genuine. Thinking about how strongly he felt about her, she gradually convinced herself that everything might turn out all right. Eventually, she made a decision and resolved that she would tell him everything. At the same time, Gavin found himself standing outside her house. As he waited there, he thought that he needed to tell her everything as well. Almost as if fate had arranged it, both of them stepped out of their apartments at nearly the same moment. They immediately noticed each other in the corridor and came face to face once again. Gathering all of his courage, Gavin told her that he could change and that he would do his best to become the kind of man she liked. Heather listened carefully before reminding him that he had once said he wanted her to wear the promise ring before they could take any further steps in their relationship. She then looked at him closely and remarked that he appeared surprisingly confident at that moment. She pointed out that even after seeing the real side of her, he still looked confident. Hearing those words caught Gavin completely off guard, and for a brief moment he could only stare at her in surprise as he tried to process what she had just said. Gavin told Heather that he finally believed that the Heather standing in front of him now was who she truly was. Hearing those words made Heather feel embarrassed for a brief moment. Gavin then admitted that there were also a few things he had kept hidden from her. However, he quickly added that they were nothing serious, and that he believed it was normal for people to have one or two small secrets that they were not ready to share immediately. After listening to him, Heather became serious and asked him to make her a promise. She told him that she wanted him to promise that he would not run away. She explained that if he could honestly make that promise and keep it, then she would wear the ring he had given her. Hearing that condition immediately made Gavin nervous. As he looked at her, He could not help thinking that he still had no idea what her big secret was. The way she was looking at him made it seem as though she was preparing to reveal something that she believed he would struggle to accept. His imagination began running wild as he wondered what kind of secret could make her so serious. He felt uneasy because he did not know whether it would be something he could handle or something that would completely overwhelm him. Heather noticed his hesitation and told him to think carefully before answering. She explained that it was not an easy promise to make and that he should not agree to it lightly. Her words only caused Gavin to become even more conflicted. In his mind, he wondered whether he had somehow ended up falling for a woman whose secrets he knew absolutely nothing about. The uncertainty made him nervous because he did not know whether her hidden truth would be something he could accept. At the same time, he knew that if the secret turned out to be something beyond his ability to handle, it would make everything much more complicated. Even with all those doubts, Gavin continued thinking about what she had just said. The fact that she had promised to wear the ring he had given her kept echoing in his mind. He felt that he should not allow fear and hesitation to control him. After gathering his courage, he finally told her that he honestly had no idea what she was about to tell him. However, despite his uncertainty, he was willing to accept whatever she wanted to share with him. Heather listened to his answer before shaking her head slightly. She told him that it was not exactly about a secret. Instead, there was something she wanted to say to him. Gavin became even more confused as he waited for her to continue. Heather then explained that she wanted to go somewhere with him that they had not been able to go before. She admitted that she had been restraining herself for a very long time and that she was genuinely excited about finally doing the conditioning training session together with him. For a moment, Gavin was completely confused by what he had just heard. He had spent so much time preparing himself for some shocking revelation that her answer caught him entirely off guard. As he processed her words, he realized that he had been imagining countless possibilities that were far more dramatic than reality. The situation was nothing like what he had expected. Eventually, the two of them ended up going to a motel together. Upon arriving, Gavin mentioned that he was going to take a shower first. Shortly afterward, Heather also went to take a shower. Once they had both finished, they returned and prepared themselves for the activity they had been discussing. After that, the two of them finally began performing the fat-burning cardio training session together, something that Heather had been looking forward to for a very long time, and something that left Gavin feeling both nervous and curious about what would happen next.